Have you ever wondered why your relationships always seem to follow the same pattern, even when you're with completely different people? Maybe it's the constant need to please, the fear of opening up completely, or even the feeling that you'll never find the ideal kind of love. What most people don't realize is that these patterns often have deep roots, many of which were planted during our childhood. It's in those early years of life that we first learn what love is, or at least what we think it should be. Whether it was trying to please unpredictable parents, hiding from the chaos of a tumultuous home, or learning to rely solely on yourself, the way we were raised silently shapes how we see and experience love as adults. But what if I told you that understanding these connections could be the first step toward change? Today we're going to dive into how your childhood has influenced your romantic choices, and most importantly, how you can rewrite that story to create healthier, more authentic relationships. Are you ready to uncover what your past reveals about your love life? Let's begin with the power of childhood in shaping love patterns. Have you ever heard the phrase, your childhood writes your love story? Okay, maybe no one has said it exactly like that, but they should. Because the truth is, our upbringing is like that app running in the background on your phone. You don't even notice it, but it's draining your battery and quietly steering your choices in love. Think about it. When we were kids, our brains were basically emotional sponges. Everything we saw, heard, and felt was absorbed. And guess what? Those experiences shape the internal manual we now use to understand love. That manual might be fantastic, or it could be a book full of confusing, mixed up pages. For example, if you grew up in a home where your parents argued over silly things like who ate the last slice of pizza, you might have learned that love equals conflict, or if they were always too busy, you might have concluded that you need to take care of yourself and avoid being a burden to others. And guess what? Without realizing it, you carry those lessons into adulthood. The big irony here, while we're busy learning how to survive our childhood, our brains are quietly recording patterns that we later use to choose partners. It's like picking a movie on a streaming platform. You think it's random, but your watch history is making the decisions for you. But don't worry, just because your manual has a few messy pages doesn't mean you're stuck with it. Let's figure this out together. The first is the pleaser. Have you noticed that you struggle to say no? That sometimes you go out of your way to make others happy, even when it goes against what you really want? If so, this might have started back in your childhood. Maybe you grew up with overly protective or reactive parents, the kind whose moods you could never predict. To protect yourself, you learned to please others, because in your mind, that kept conflicts or rejection at bay. As an adult, this pattern might show up in your relationships. You say everything is fine, even when it's not. Maybe you avoid tough conversations because you're afraid of upsetting someone or starting a fight. And if this sounds familiar, here's something you might not have realized. People pleasers often lie, not to deceive, but to avoid conflict. Like when you say you agree with something just to keep the peace. If you see yourself in this description, know that you're not alone, but it's crucial to start focusing on your own needs. Ask yourself, what do I want right now? That small question can change everything, because believe it or not, the people who truly love you don't need you to be perfect or to please them all the time. They just want the real you. Second, the victim. On the other hand, there's the victim. This profile emerges when silence becomes your main form of defense. If you've ever found yourself holding back your thoughts because it feels easier than risking confrontation, it might stem from a chaotic childhood. Perhaps you grew up in a home where arguments were frequent or emotions were so unpredictable that staying quiet felt like the safest option. Over time, you may have learned to hide, whether by physically withdrawing or retreating into your imagination as a way to escape the turmoil. As an adult, this tendency can manifest as a deep aversion to conflict. You might even gravitate toward controlling partners because, in a way, that dynamic feels familiar. After all, you've already navigated environments where someone else had all the power. What's less obvious is how this pattern can disconnect you from your own desires. Living this way for so long can make it hard to answer even the simplest questions, like, what's your favorite food? That's because you've spent so much time prioritizing the needs of others over your own. If this resonates with you, try starting small. Speak up about something simple, like your opinion on a movie or where to eat dinner. Your voice deserves to be heard. You've spent enough time hiding. It's time to let yourself be seen. Now let's talk about the controller. This profile often develops in response to a childhood where support or stability was lacking. If you feel the need to be in control to make sure things go right, or if you believe that nothing will work unless you're the one organizing it, this might be why. Perhaps your parents were emotionally or physically absent, or maybe you learned early on that the only person you could truly rely on was yourself. In this context, anger often became a tool, a way to ensure things went the way you needed them to. As an adult, this tendency can show up in your relationships. You might create strict rules to maintain a sense of control, or feel uneasy when plans change unexpectedly. What many don't realize is that controllers often struggle to ask for help. To you, depending on someone else might feel like a weakness, and carrying everything on your own might even provide a false sense of security. But underneath it all, this constant need for control can be exhausting. If this profile resonates with you, try starting small. Let someone else make a decision, like picking where to eat, or take a step toward vulnerability by sharing with your partner how a difficult situation made you feel. Vulnerability isn't a sign of weakness. In fact, it's the foundation of deep and meaningful connections. Then there's the vacillator. This profile often forms when the love you received in childhood was inconsistent. If you found yourself dreaming of the perfect partner, someone who will love you exactly the way you've always wanted, it might be because your early experiences with love left you feeling unsure of what to expect. Perhaps your parents were affectionate one moment and distant the next, creating an unpredictable dynamic. Over time, this fear of abandonment might have led you to believe that you needed to be perfect to earn and keep the love of those around you. As an adult, this pattern can lead to emotional highs and lows in your relationships. You might fall hard and fast, idealizing your partner and putting them on a pedestal, only to later feel disappointed when they don't meet your unrealistic expectations. A common but often overlooked behavior is how small actions, like a delayed text response, can feel like rejection, even when there's no real reason for it. If you resonate with this profile, start practicing a focus on the present and what's real. When that fear creeps in, ask yourself, is this a fact, or is it just my insecurity speaking louder? Remember, no one is perfect, but true love doesn't have to be flawless to be meaningful and authentic. Finally, we have the avoider. This profile often stems from a childhood where independence was seen as the ultimate virtue. If you find yourself preferring to face challenges alone or feeling uncomfortable discussing emotions, it might be because vulnerability was discouraged during your early years. Perhaps your parents, either directly or indirectly, taught you that emotions were unnecessary or even a sign of weakness. In response, you learned to rely solely on yourself, keeping your feelings hidden to avoid depending on anyone. In romantic relationships, this can show up as difficulty connecting emotionally. You might feel uneasy with intimate gestures or think conversations about feelings are a waste of time. What many people don't realize is that behind this facade of self-sufficiency, there can be a deep sense of loneliness. Keeping that emotional wall up might feel like protection, but it often pushes away the people who matter most. If this description feels familiar, start by taking small steps toward emotional connection. It could be as simple as saying, "I really appreciated what you did for me," or "I missed you today." These subtle actions can build intimacy without making you feel overwhelmed. Loving someone doesn't mean giving up your independence. It's about sharing parts of yourself, one step at a time. Now that you've identified your profile, or maybe noticed traits from more than one, it's time to take the next step, breaking free from the patterns your childhood left behind and creating a healthier path in love. And before you start thinking it's impossible, take a deep breath. You're not a prisoner of your past. Let's do this together. The first thing to remember is that recognizing these patterns is already a huge accomplishment. Many people go through their entire lives repeating the same mistakes without ever asking themselves why. So if you've made it this far, congratulations. This is the beginning of change. If you're a pleaser, your challenge is to set boundaries. Yes, even the thought of it might make your stomach turn, but remember how as a child, you felt like you had to please others to avoid problems. Now, you have the power to do things differently. Start small. Say no to something simple, like an invitation you really don't want to accept, and notice how the world doesn't fall apart because of it. If you identify with the victim, your next step is to reclaim your voice. For a long time, you might have felt like your opinions didn't matter, but that's far from the truth. Begin by sharing something about yourself, even something small, like a memory or a thought. You deserve to be heard. If you're a controller, your challenge lies in learning to trust. I know that might sound scary, especially if you grew up believing you could only count on yourself, but total control doesn't protect, it isolates. Try delegating something small to your partner and allow yourself to be surprised. For vacillators, the work is about embracing reality. There's no such thing as a perfect partner, and that's freeing. Imperfect people have something incredible: authenticity. Whenever you notice your expectations taking over, ask yourself, am I reacting to what my partner did or to what I expected them to be? And if you're an avoider, the key is vulnerability. Opening your heart might feel intimidating, but it's also incredibly freeing. Start small with something like, "That made me happy," or "I missed you today." Tiny gestures can lead to powerful connections. Remember, your past explains a lot about who you are, but it doesn't define who you'll become. Breaking old patterns takes time and practice, but the result is worth it. A love built on truth, balance, and genuine connection. Now tell me, which of these profiles resonates most with you? Share your story in the comments. You might help someone going through the same thing. And if you enjoyed this video and want to keep learning about how to improve your relationships, subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell so you don't miss any content. Share this video with someone who might feel stuck in these patterns. Together, we can transform our love stories.